a place called Levenshulme. If you travel south from the center of Manchester past the busy streets, railway bridges, and rows of red brick houses, you eventually arrive in a place with a character all of its own. This is Levenshulme. To someone passing through for the first time, it might simply look like another busy Manchester neighborhood. There are buses moving along Stockport Road, trains coming and going, small shops, cafés, takeaways, and people rushing through their everyday lives. But Levenshulme is much more than what you see from the main road. Behind these streets is a story stretching back hundreds of years. A story of farmland becoming a suburb, of industry and railway workers, of families arriving from different parts of the world, and of communities changing while somehow holding on to their identity. To understand Levenshulme today, we have to look beyond the traffic and shop fronts. We have to imagine a completely different landscape, long before Manchester became the great industrial city we know today. Before the busy streets go, back several centuries and the Levenshulme we recognize today disappears. There was no busy Stockport Road filled with cars, no railway station, and certainly no rows of tightly packed Victorian houses. The area was largely rural, surrounded by fields, farms, tracks, and open land. The name Levenshulme itself is very old. Historical spellings changed over the centuries, as often happened with English place names, and the name is generally connected with an old family name and the word holm or hulme, referring to an area of land. For generations, this was a small settlement sitting outside the rapidly growing town of Manchester. Life would have moved at a much slower pace. People depended heavily on the land, local trades, and nearby communities. It is difficult to picture today when you stand on Stockport Road, surrounded by shops and buses. But underneath modern Levenshulme is the memory of that rural landscape. Then Manchester began to change, and those changes would eventually transform Levenshulme forever. Manchester comes closer. During the 18th and 19th centuries, Manchester experienced one of the greatest transformations in British history. The Industrial Revolution turned the town into an international center of manufacturing and trade. Cotton mills, warehouses, factories, and engineering works expanded rapidly, and thousands of people came looking for employment. Manchester grew outwards, and places that had once seemed like distant villages suddenly found the city moving closer to them. Levenshulme was one of those places. Its location on the route between Manchester and Stockport made it increasingly important. Roads became busier, new houses appeared, and connections with the city improved. People could live outside Manchester while still traveling towards its factories, workshops, and commercial districts for work. Gradually, fields gave way to streets. Small clusters of homes became larger neighborhoods. The peaceful rural settlement was becoming part of an expanding urban world. Levenshulme was no longer simply a village near Manchester. It was beginning the transformation into the neighborhood generations of Mancunians would eventually call home. The railway changes everything. Then came something that changed communities across Britain: the railway. During the 19th century, railway expansion connected Manchester with towns and cities throughout the country, and Levenshulme found itself directly on an important route. The railway made traveling into Manchester much easier and encouraged further development around the area. Imagine what this must have felt like to people who remembered the quieter village. Suddenly there were locomotives, railway workers, passengers, and goods moving through the neighborhood. New houses were needed for a growing population. Streets spread across former farmland, and the familiar red brick terraces associated with industrial Manchester became part of Levenshulme's landscape. The railway was more than transport. It helped change the rhythm of everyday life. People could travel further for employment, and businesses could reach larger markets. Even today, the railway remains part of Levenshulme's identity. Stand near the station as a train passes overhead, and you are hearing an echo of the same transport revolution that helped turn this once rural settlement into an urban Manchester community. Streets built around working lives. As Levenshulme grew, its streets became home to working families whose lives were connected to Manchester's industrial economy. These were ordinary people: railway employees, factory workers, craftsmen, shopkeepers, laborers, and families trying to build stable lives in a rapidly changing city. The red brick terraced house became one of the defining features of neighborhoods like Levenshulme. Houses stood close together because space was valuable and Manchester's population was expanding quickly. Life was not always comfortable. Industrial Manchester could be crowded, polluted, and physically demanding. Long working hours were common, and families often lived with far fewer comforts than we take for granted today. Yet these streets also produced strong neighborhood relationships. People knew the families living nearby. Children played outside. Local shops were part of daily life, and pubs, churches, schools, and community organizations became places where people met and shared news. Levenshulme was being built not only with bricks and mortar, but through thousands of ordinary relationships that gave the neighborhood its character. A community becomes part of Manchester. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Levenshulme had become increasingly urban, and in 1909 it officially became part of the city of Manchester. By then, the old village had been transformed. There were established streets, schools, places of worship, shops, and transport connections. But becoming part of Manchester did not mean Levenshulme lost its local identity. This is something you can still feel today. People can be proudly Mancunian while also being strongly connected to Levenshulme itself. Through the early 20th century, families experienced enormous social changes. 2 world wars affected communities across Britain. Men left home for military service, while those remaining behind dealt with shortages, uncertainty, and loss. Later came new housing, changing industries, and improvements in living standards. Manchester itself was moving away from the industrial world that had created so many of its neighborhoods. Factories closed, employment changed, and old ways of life slowly disappeared. Levenshulme had already survived one major transformation, from countryside to city. Now it would have to adapt again. New families, new chapters. One of the most important chapters in the modern story of Levenshulme is migration. Manchester has always attracted people searching for work, safety, education, and opportunity, and Levenshulme became home to families from many different backgrounds. Over the decades, communities with roots in Ireland, South Asia, Africa, the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and many other parts of the world became part of the neighborhood. Pakistani and other South Asian families in particular became an important part of the area's social and commercial life. New businesses appeared along Stockport Road and surrounding streets. Grocery shops carried ingredients that earlier generations of residents might never have seen. Restaurants and takeaways introduced different flavors. Mosques and other places of worship joined older churches as landmarks of community life. Languages from around the world could now be heard on streets once dominated by the voices of industrial Manchester. But this wasn't the replacement of one Levenshulme by another. It was another layer being added to a neighborhood that had already reinvented itself many times. Stockport Road, the street that tells the story. If there is one place where you can watch the story of Levenshulme unfolding in real time, it is Stockport Road. Walk along it, and almost every few meters something changes. A traditional business might sit beside an international grocery store. A cafe may be only a few doors away from a takeaway serving food from another part of the world. You see barbers, bakeries, restaurants, convenience stores, and businesses run by people whose families arrived in Manchester at completely different moments in history. Buses constantly move people between Levenshulme, Longsight, Manchester city centre, and communities further south. The road can feel noisy, crowded, and sometimes chaotic, but that is also what makes it fascinating. This isn't a carefully preserved museum street. It is a working high street serving a living community. Generations have walked along this route to work, to shop, to meet friends, or simply to get home. Buildings change and businesses come and go, but Stockport Road continues to act like the main artery running through Levenshulme. The market and the spirit of independence. Levenshulme also developed a reputation for something Manchester has always done well: independent culture. Levenshulme Market became one of the modern symbols of that spirit, bringing together independent traders, food sellers, makers, and local businesses. It reflected a wider change taking place across the neighborhood. Younger residents, artists, students, professionals, and independent entrepreneurs increasingly found Levenshulme attractive. There was creativity here, but also affordability compared with some parts of Manchester, although rising housing costs would later become a serious concern for many residents. New cafés and businesses appeared alongside shops that had served established communities for years. This combination gave Levenshulme an unusual energy. On one street, you could encounter something representing generations of Manchester history, while around the corner, somebody might be experimenting with an entirely new idea. That mixture isn't always neat, and sometimes different visions for the neighborhood compete with one another. But perhaps that is exactly what makes Levenshulme interesting. It has rarely stood still long enough to become just one thing, more than buildings. It is easy to tell the history of a place through dates, buildings, and railway lines, but that only tells half the story. The real history of Levenshulme belongs to its people. Think about the generations who have opened their front doors here each morning. The railway worker leaving before sunrise, the mother taking children to school, the shopkeeper lifting the shutters on Stockport Road, the family arriving in Britain and trying to make an unfamiliar city feel like home, the student renting their first room in Manchester, the elderly resident remembering businesses and buildings that disappeared decades ago, and the child growing up today surrounded by cultures, languages, and traditions from across the world, simply thinking of all of it as home. These lives rarely appear in history books, yet together they create the history that matters most. A neighborhood is not really its roads or buildings. Those are only the stage. The story comes from the millions of ordinary moments that happen between the people living there. A neighborhood that keeps changing. Modern Levenshulme is changing again. Manchester's population has grown rapidly, and demand for housing has pushed more people towards neighborhoods outside the city center. Levenshulme's railway connection, location, and distinctive community have made it increasingly attractive. Old properties are renovated, new cafes and independent businesses arrive, house prices and rents change. To some people, this brings investment and opportunities. To others, it creates a fear that long-established residents may eventually be priced out of the neighborhood they helped build. This tension is not unique to Levenshulme. Communities across Manchester and other British cities are asking similar questions. How do you improve a place without erasing what made it special? Maybe that is the real story of this place. Levenshulme was never created by one generation, one culture, or one moment in history. It was created again and again by the people who chose to call it home. And today, every person walking these streets is adding another small chapter to a story that is still being written.